Sometimes the most meaningful gifts or decorations aren't just regular old family pictures. I'm talking about your treasured high school football jersey, a ticket from your first concert, or a flyer for a loved one's art show. These are your most sentimental possessions, and they can be protected and immortalized by the perfect frame. You know, I just got an old passport of my dad's framed. He died a couple years ago, and I don't know why. This really spoke to me. Luckily, FrameBridge makes it easy and affordable to custom frame just about anything. Just pick the perfect frame for your piece from their curated selection of styles, and their design experts will do the rest. And they'll ship it right to your doorstep for free on orders over $100. Best of all is FrameBridge's happiness guarantee. If you're not 100% happy with your piece for any reason, they'll make it right. Visit framebridge.com or one of 8 local FrameBridge stores at 14th Street, Union Market, Georgetown, Bethesda, Old Town, Clarendon, McLean, or the Mosaic District, and start framing. Today on CityCast DC, so tens of thousands of Washingtonians used to live in alleys. Back in the old days, they were thought of as slum dwellings. But could alley homes make a comeback and maybe even go upscale? Mark Lawrence and Elizabeth Emerson have an architecture firm that specializes in turning yesterday's garages into tomorrow's boutique apartments. They're here to explain what it would look like for residents if DC opened up alley dwellings and what it could mean for everyone's cost of living. Today is Wednesday, July 30th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hey, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Michael.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys are both architects, and you've specialized in alley dwellings. The city now looks to be moving towards zoning that would make more of these kinds of buildings possible. Is the idea that the alleys could be the answer to DC's housing issues?
Yeah, I don't think it can solve the world's problems or the city's problems from a housing standpoint, but the changes that they are proposing are welcoming. Like, they're welcomed by us because they help make for more residences in what we think is a really special part of Washington's urban fabric.
Can you just give me a thumbnail of, like, what are the proposed changes? What would they allow that's sort of not allowed now, or and so on?
Yes. The key highlight changes include, like, one example is the alley width. So to have a residence in an alley, there was a minimum width requirement of 24 feet, and they have reduced that. So it's, as long as an alley is 15 feet wide, you can now have a residence in an alley. And if an alley lot is of a certain minimum size, you can do 2 dwellings on that lot, which is kind of, I think, the best thing that they've done, because it's, in theory, potentially doubled some existing residences to add a second unit. These alley dwellings can be made into sort of multifamily, so to speak. And then the other requirement that's been adjusted a little bit is the height of a building in an alley. Currently is maximum height is 20 feet. Now it can be 22 feet. So every little bit helps.
So this is being discussed a lot as sort of the wave of the future, right? We've moved away from this kind of 1950s style zoning that makes it harder to do density and multifamily and things like that. But in fact, this is also sort of retro. And we have a whole episode with Kim Prothero-Williams, who literally wrote a book on DC's old alley life. Elizabeth, can you give me the sort of quick version of that history? People in Washington, lots and lots of people in Washington lived in alleys.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, some of the first housing that was built in the city was built in the alleys when they were constructing the major federal government sites, the Capitol and the White House. Instead of building street-facing housing, which did have to meet a kind of building code, they built quick dwellings in the middle of the block. So the alleys, in some cases, went in before the street-facing housing. So Foggy Bottom, West End, Capitol Hill, Southwest all had alley housing that was occupied throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century. And it was, the way we've described it in our research, as sort of like introductory housing. I mean, of course, before slavery was abolished, there were kitchens, there were quarters for enslaved people in the alleys. After the Civil War, as the population of the city began to grow, It is a place where a lot of free people of color came to live, but also immigrants. There were immigrant communities that settled in the alleys as well. So it's very rooted in our history from the get-go as a city.
In the height of sort of slum clearance in the 20th century, these dwellings were often viewed as slums. And I think historians have gone and said, actually, these were vibrant communities. They were often quite nice, and they were grounding for people.
I think, both of these things can be true. They were vibrant communities with sort of, independent economies. And at the same time, it was really substandard housing. Like, I don't think anybody would go into those alley dwellings and say, this is a great way for our, most vulnerable population to live. So, it was deteriorated. There was absentee landlordism. The alley conditions were pretty deplorable. At the same time, those were still thriving communities for the people who could only afford that.
So, Mark, you guys did a whole study called the Washington Alley Project. And what you are looking at in that study is not making deplorable conditions, but you argue that alley dwellings could house 200,000 people in a perfect world. That is a big number. Can you explain how we got there and what it would look like?
Sure. And yes, with the help of the zoning, that might get us closer. We did a kind of cursory measurement of all the entire alley network in Washington. And if there were zoning laws that allowed for multiple dwellings along all of that alley dwelling surface as those buildings meet the street, that you could, in theory, create housing for that number of units. And so it's a bit of a kind of overview and an estimate. I think the important takeaway, and I love that DC zoning is really looking at alleys and thinking about how they contribute, is it's not just about the numbers of residents that can be in these places. The increase does so much more for these spaces anyway, because, when you walk through Washington's streets and alleys, that variety of scale and all of that surface, that urban surface that meets the street in an alley, has been kind of a little bit forgotten or a little bit left behind in a lot of parts of the city. And it's valuable now that, the city is only so big and there's a height limit. And so now we could, in theory, really look at these parts of the city, and there's new potential beyond housing. There's other things that could occur as well. And the Washington Alley Project doesn't focus solely on that residential ad, but also the value of those public spaces from a safety standpoint, from an art standpoint, from a garden and landscape standpoint. All these things can contribute to a vibrant city.
Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer? With the perfect latte and the crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about, but you can't quite remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. Create personal lists of places that you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date night, or your weekend getaways for when you just need to escape. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. No ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com. And check out overlookmaps.com/DC to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
So can you just paint a picture for me, Elizabeth? Like I look at my back alley, and it's an alley. There's a lot of little standalone kind of rickety garages that people have. that are not connected to their houses, and the trash cans are out there and so on. In the vernacular of our culture, right? People talk about back alley. It's not usually like a compliment. What would this look like? Because I think you guys, you have a pretty high-end design studio, and you're making aesthetically pleasing stuff. So can you describe it to people so that maybe they change their minds?
Downtown in our what we call our super blocks, where we've got really big blocks like between 9th and 10th Street, which is where Blagden Alley and Naylor Court are located. You've got wide alleys with isolated properties inside them. Those kinds of alleys lend themselves really well to commercial or combined commercial and residential use of kind of live work. And in fact, that's where our studio is. In the neighborhoods that are further out from the center, the alleys are more like you described. They tend to be 15 feet wide. They're bordered by garages and sheds. What we've tried to show people is that even those alleys can be improved by better lighting, by we have something we call a disco light, which is kind of a mirror light that would be mounted at corner conditions so you can see around the alley. And if we can make them better quality public space, improving the paving, improving the lighting, we can start to use them in different ways. Of course, nobody's proposing that we would get rid of trash collection.
But wait, talk to me about the actual structures that you build or you imagine people building.
Well, we have built some, and we've built some installations as well to help people see the alley differently. So we worked with Mount Vernon Triangle Community Improvement District on an alley in their neighborhood called Prather's Alley, which is a very high density commercial block through alley. And one of the things that we did was work on the traffic patterns. So slowing traffic, making it one way, providing improved lighting and art along the walkway makes it an enjoyable place to be a pedestrian or be on a bicycle. In terms of structures that we've built or designed, we've worked with a couple of different small scale developers to develop housing in alleys. So on Capitol Hill, in Columbia Heights, these are units, smaller units, less than 1,000 square feet that provide, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath dwellings that are could be really well used for live work conditions like artists or people with small production studios. So, they're very viable, particularly in those downtown areas. For the outer neighborhoods, they're really great for creating ADUs.
Wait, what's that ADU, just for people who don't know?
An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. So in these R1 districts or R2, where you have single family detached homes, you can potentially build an accessory dwelling unit, which can be a standalone small structure, which could accommodate a second household, if you will.
So you've got like a DC row house with an alley behind it. And there's row house, you've got a little typical DC postage stamp backyard, and behind that is something that currently maybe is the garage or the carriage house. And once you guys are done with it, it is typically 2 stories and has a couple of bedrooms?
Exactly. It could be 2 stories. It'll have its own kitchen. It'll have an independent full bathroom. Maybe that first floor continues to function as a garage. Maybe it actually gets incorporated into the living space. Maybe it's a little bit of both. And, our studio is an interesting example because it was a commercial building and it was used as a commercial building for 70 years, 80 years until Mark and his wife bought the building and converted it and brought back residential use into the building, but our studio's on the ground floor. So these smaller scale buildings are really great for kind of live work condition.
And who owns them? I mean, are they always owned by whoever owns the house that faces the street?
Depends. Some lots extend from the main street into the alley, but in other cases, and I think this is where the zoning change is focused, is if you have a lot that is alley adjacent to an alley but does not have access to a street, you have a pretty strict set of constraints upon that property, and these zoning changes help loosen those constraints quite a bit. The height limit, but also having the ability to have multiple units facing an alley. And I think when you described your alley where there might be a series of garage doors or fences or maybe a little garage itself adjacent to that alley. If the lots are large enough, subdivisions could occur and families could live in the alley. And so, it's a little bit of like one step at a time, but you can imagine as these lots that are large enough could accommodate additional units, you start to have a new kind of street, so to speak. And the interesting thing for us about those alleys is it's not our intent to destroy the other functional elements that alleys provide in trash service and those types of things. We think that these things can happen in tandem. There has to be some, nuance to how that occurs, but we see them as vibrant public spaces that also can be functional and continue to serve those needs as well.
What would have to change in garbage collection?
So we're working with a client right now. It happens to be one of these evolutionary lots that Mark is talking about, where there was a large street-facing row house with a very deep lot. The lot was subdivided some time ago, and the structure that was on the back portion was made an independent lot, independent residence. And so the homeowner, our client, has been living there in a space that was converted from a light commercial use. It was a gallery space, but it had a little apartment. We're helping her redesign this dwelling, which is, perfectly viable dwelling. But she has a car. We need to store trash. She needs package delivery like everybody else, And so it requires really thoughtful design at the first floor of the interface to the street, setting the entrance of the house back from the street, providing a place to tuck trash cans away so that they're not out in the middle of the street, providing places for packages to get dropped off securely. So it's a lot about the door and the entry to make sure that all of these things can coexist well.
I'm curious, how did you guys fall into this work? I mean, you've built a studio that specializes in doing innovative things in alleys behind people's houses. How'd you fall into it?
Part of this came from the purchase of where the studio is located in Naylor Court, and just having a studio there where we're working, but also having a family there and getting sort of firsthand experience about what are the challenges of having two small children and their front yard is, a street, so to speak, or an alley. And how do you take ownership of that space when you need it and give it back when it's time for someone to drive by and collect trash. So those types of things are things that got us really thinking about how to live and work in these specific public spaces. We taught a seminar at Catholic University School of Architecture called The Capital and the Metropolis, and kind of looking at both New York and Washington and their very specific sort of differences as cities. And one of our students, as part of their end of semester project, focused on alleys and really started to look at Washington's alleys, and noting the fact that New York doesn't have any alleys. And if you're there in the summertime, it's very obvious that trash collection is a thing that could be, maybe better concealed. But that student kind of brought that piece to our attention and got us really interested, as this public space has quite a bit of opportunity.
In 2017, we had some extra capacity in the summer. We decided it was our 10-year anniversary as a studio, and we wanted to do something meaningful, something meaty. And we decided to do a research project, and we took the alley as the subject of our research because we wanted to try and understand how this condition came to be. Like, how did we as a city develop with alleys when the metropolis, New York City, did not? And we've got our own theories about why that happened, but it was the really dedicated study of the L'Enfant plan that helped us understand, oh wait, this is a product of our geometry on some level. It's like we have these really large blocks, people put them to use, as in lots of different ways.
So I got to ask, because it's also your business, how much does it cost, to do this kind of conversion? If I have behind my house a rickety garage that's about as big as the VW Beetle that someone parked there 50 years ago, and I want to turn that into a place where I could actually rent it to, a student or a single person, realistically speaking, what would it cost me?
Well, you're in a good position because you can run utilities to your new ADU from your home. So, the cost for alley construction would be just like the cost for construction in your home. It's not different when you're in that kind of condition. Where it gets a little bit trickier is when we're working with smaller scale developers who have independent lots on alleys that they want to develop as housing, but they don't have the ability to access street-facing lots for utilities. Then you have to run utilities down the alley, and that gets costly.
Right. I'm just thinking of the price because I assume a lot of people who are thinking of this kind of conversion that would add more housing to the market, which is something people want, they're going to be thinking, well, how long until this thing has paid for itself? And the answer to that seems like how long is like a bunch of years.
Yeah, it might be a bunch of years. The cool thing about the ability to do 2 units is that in theory, you could build this building that has 2 units and sell one and live in the other. And I think that's huge because I think that allows for someone to it takes a lot of risk out of this because people still need and want to move to Washington, D.C., I think, and hope. And so I think there would be a demand for that type of product.
Yeah, it also is potentially a way for people to stay in their neighborhood. And I know the people from the mayor's office have been interested in this or the Office of Planning as a way of allowing long-term Washingtonians to stay, within a neighborhood that's changing rapidly. They might have mobility issues. They might be older. And then if they develop in this way, they can retain their property and retain the wealth that they've, generated being a long-term homeowner.
One last question. A lot of this conversation about we need more housing. Let's take advantage of the alleys. Let's zone in ways that let homeowners afford where they're going to live by renting something out that they weren't taking much advantage of. All of this was premised on Washington being a place that lots of people are moving with a vibrant economy. We're now in a very different moment. There's massive looming federal job cuts. There's a lot of chaos. Is that going to take away some of the pressure that's sort of helped with these changes you guys have sought?
It may slow, but the need for adding housing is only going to increase over time. I mean, we take a long view of city development. There was not much housing built in Washington from 1970 to 2000, almost none. But then there was a lot of housing built. So it kind of goes in fits and starts. It may slow for a little bit, but historically the city it has continued to grow and it will continue to grow. It is the seat of the federal government, which isn't going anywhere.
That's what you think.
Well, it might grow and grow and shrink, but unless something really dramatic happens, this will continue to be our capital. And so I think we take a longer view. The investment that you make in the housing now will pay off in the future, and we will continue to need more and more different types of housing. We need more housing that middle-class homeowners can afford. And a lot of the housing that's been built in the last 10 or 15 years is leased housing. It's not individual home ownership. And that's really important for creating stability in a city.
Mark, Elizabeth, thank you guys for being here.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. This was a delight. Thank you.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.